Last summer, the US reportedly used the Talisman Sabre exercises to create a stockpile of military equipment in Australia. And this stockpile is supposedly just one of several set up by the US through agreements with countries around the Asia Pacific. How does this show a shift in US strategic planning?
Yeah, look, I think it's an evolution in American strategic thought based on changes in some of the big debates about logistics and where you put war stocks. Previously, there was an emphasis on having great big ammo resupply and equipment resupply depots. And now I think the logic is that it's better to have sort of multiple ones, partly, of course, because it increases their survivability, but also because it can potentially enable the US to negotiate more quickly with certain allies as opposed to others in the event of regional conflict.
Australia is relatively far from Taiwan. Now, considering that the US already has large bases in Japan and South Korea, how does having a stockpile in Australia help the US respond to crises in the Taiwan Strait or in the South China Sea?
Well, look, at the moment, it doesn't, given that the US has only left minimal stocks for a few companies, I think, to perform resupply. So this is resupplying the resuppliers, if you like. It is further away and therefore beyond the range of some of the Chinese naval ship-based missiles. And in addition to that, it also potentially sets the stage for US combat operations in the southern end of the South China Sea. And that's in line also with recent changes to Australian strategic policy. The Defence Strategic Review focuses very much on littoral defence, by which it means effectively, the sort of archipelagic part of Southeast Asia. And I think that's predominantly where these stocks are intended for primary use.
Why wouldn't the US simply place a stockpile of weapons in Taiwan?
Well, for one thing, because it would be a target. And for another thing, its defence relationship with Taiwan is one which is kind of conditioned by the Taiwan Relations Act. Whereas with Australia, you have a fully fledged bilateral security treaty that dates back to the 1950s. And that's very long-standing security and defence cooperation. And therefore, I think Australia is very much seen as a logical partner when it comes to these types of decisions.
How could these US weapons stockpiles affect planning by China's military, the PLA?
I mean, I think it does give the PLA a bit of potential pause when it comes to thinking about things like hypothetical conflict escalation. So we've seen, for instance, in the Ukraine conflict that NATO has been resupplying Ukraine and that Vladimir Putin has been very reticent to take any action, really, despite the rhetoric, to directly engage with NATO forces. Now, it's different in Southeast Asia, but nonetheless, I think it's still the case that the Chinese would have to consider the likelihood of broadening a conflict if in fact they decided to target US war stocks that were on Australian soil, especially if Australia wasn't necessarily a directly participant combatant in the event of hostilities between the two. So it makes the situation, I think, broader and potentially a bit more complex in terms of Chinese decision making.